My name is Ella Spillman, and my article is The Movement of Chinese Ceramics, Appropriation in Global History. This article was written by Dr. Stacy Pearson. She is a professor at the University of London. She is a very experienced author. From what I found, she's written many books, articles, and book reviews, all focusing on Chinese ceramics, the export of Chinese ceramics, blue and white porcelain, etc. So her article begins with some common assumptions about the traditional histories of Chinese ceramics. These include that the appropriation of Chinese ceramics in other cultures was inevitable, especially porcelain, that a taste for Chinese ceramics follows, and that Chinese ceramics actively influence passively recipient foreign countries. Her main focus for dissecting this point is blue and white porcelain, and she aims to show that the globalized perspective of Chinese ceramic trade is not the only perspective. Pearson uses chronological evidence to show the complex and non-linear development of the interest and appropriation of Chinese ceramics in other cultures. Evidence like shipwrecks can be misconstrued or generalized. So things found in one shipwreck may not actually represent the actual export of goods, but they have been generalized to represent that. So she is arguing against that. She asserts that Chinese ceramic pieces are not only artistic commodities, but are items created and sold in bulk, but consumed by individuals whose conception of otherness is altered through the experience of taking in art from another culture. This suggests that the reception of exports was extremely specific to local areas. So there weren't very many terms from this article that were from East Asian languages, but there were some terms I was unfamiliar with that were from the languages of the areas that this author specifically focused on, which were Europe and the Middle East. So the first term is chinoiserie, and it refers to the Western appropriation of Chinese art styles and is especially associated with English royalty. These are the very expensive and ornate blue and white porcelain pieces that are collected and highly valued. Chinekane, or a China house, where one would hold collections of Chinese porcelain pieces. China dishes or Chinaware are the commonly used English terms for Chinese ceramics during the early discovery in Europe. Delftware, the image here is actually a Delftware plate, and it is a tin glazed earthenware originating from Holland, and it is intended to mimic porcelain before porcelain was brought over to Europe. And then crack is a type of porcelain that was exported from China. So the use of these traded ceramics varied across time, culture, and the individual's use preferences. At any given time, they could be displayed or used or collected or stored away. They generally were displayed and occasionally used as they represent the wealth and taste of the owner. These pieces extended beyond bowls and cups to vases, figurines, and jars. And they grew to represent social values in English culture as the collection of Chinese ceramics became gendered in the 18th century. Vincentelli argues that women have a special relationship with ceramics and that special meaning is associated with ceramics as a result. Sloboda says that collecting china signifies both polite taste and sociability, and that it is an appropriate activity for serious and sober ladies. This was an interesting turning point, as the collection and display of artistic items such as these required taste and knowledge of trade and export, which had previously been a more male-oriented hobby. So the Leonard cup is a Chinese blue and white porcelain cup with a silver mount that was added in Europe. This addition of silver was very common in 16th century England, especially as porcelain was just starting to gain popularity, as it created value for people who didn't recognize porcelain as valuable on its own. Likewise, in the Middle East, these objects would be altered through the inscription of names to record the purpose or the buyer of the gift, and sometimes even the recipient of this gift. They also would add brass mounts to the items, but it seems to be a bit more common in England. Chinese ceramics had become familiar to the English as shown by popular entertainment, sales in shops, display in elite homes, and use as collector items. And they're often displayed with other things considered exotic. Shakespeare makes reference to porcelain ceramics or china dishes and states that they are worth more than other type of dishes. So that gives us a kind of cultural context for that time period. In the Middle East, the development of interest in Chinese ceramics was very different from the traditional global perspective. Ceramics had been traded to the Middle East as early as the year 618. At the same time, methods for copying Chinese ceramic styles were developed quickly. So when porcelain was discovered, the technique was immediately copied in the Middle East. These items were mostly used as tablewares. The preferred designs were pieces that looked Chinese rather than pieces that were made to pander to the Islamic style. These items were valued for their foreign nature, but copies were also used because of their cultural preference for the Chinese aesthetic over the made in China labeling. Some scholars assert that blue and white decoration emerged suddenly to cater to, quote, Muslim taste, which is said to consist of dense designs, geometric patterns, and to which Pearson responds that, quote, beyond the awkwardness of assuming such a thing exists and the lack of evidence beyond a visual interpretation of decoration, blue and white porcelain was made in China as early as the 9th century, as evidenced by findings from exports. These Chinese ceramics were valued highly by Middle Eastern royalty, and the objects were of such significance that they could actually mark the symbolic presence of the Iranian ruler during ceremonies he could not personally physically attend. Between England and the Middle East, the timeline for the fluctuation in the use and appropriation of Chinese ceramics are very different. Copies were developed at different times. The priorities for collecting versus displaying, or copies versus straight from the source, or modifications with metal versus none. None of these things happened in a linear or predictable way across these vastly different cultures. And according to Pearson, we should not expect them to have developed the same way across different cultures. My thoughts on this article are that it seems very well researched and thought out, and she offers a very detailed explanation. Her evidence is very holistic and shows the social side, the side of trade, the side of evidence and science, and the way that the ceramics were actually made, with the varying ingredients and materials used across cultures. So I really enjoyed this perspective. And I think that she made some really interesting points, and was sure to address the social perspectives such as gender as well, which I thought was very interesting. There's my bibliography. Thank you.